Alrighty, good morning, everybody. My name is Maggie Coast. I'm the Director for the Strategy and Performance Division at the Department of Economic Development. I want to welcome everyone to the call this morning. I know we've still got a few folks who are signing in. Just really want to say thank you for applying for our CARES Act funding, for joining us this morning for the training. We have been working incredibly hard to make sure that this process runs as smoothly as we can make it for you. Implementing entirely new systems, we are working on getting thousands of applicants through this application process and now through the reimbursement process. And we really want to make sure that we give you everything we can today to help you prepare for reimbursement, which we expect to open early next week. We are making some final tweaks to our reimbursement forms, and we'll have that ready for you to go next week, and want to make sure that you have everything you need to prepare all of your documentation and that we're very clear on what is eligible for you to be able to submit so that we can get you through that reimbursement process as quickly as possible and hit all of our deadlines that we need to hit for the federal CARES Act guidance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Bauman on our team, and she's going to walk us through some of the eligibility scenarios here and some of the important dates that you'll need to know as we enter the reimbursement phase. But again, just want to say thank you to everybody who's joining us today. Really appreciate it, making the time for us, and certainly we just know that we are working as hard as we can to make this process as streamlined and smooth for you as possible. So Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Maggie. Good morning, everybody. So just a quick recap of the overall process that we're going to be going through to get your funds out to you. You are going to receive an invitation to submit your reimbursement from the platform submittable. You will complete your reimbursement form and additional documentations and submit all of your proofs of expense and payments. Our department will review your request, and then the Office of Administration will process your payment, and then your check will be issued out to you no later than December 30th of this year. All of your requests for reimbursements do have to be submitted to the department along with any supporting documentation by November 16th at 5 p.m. So we want to go ahead and get all this information shared out to you so that you can start getting all of your documentation together. So just to recap some of the eligible expenses, general rules for eligible expenses are that they do have to be incurred and paid between March 1st and November 16th of this year. The total reimbursed amount cannot exceed what we have approved you for, what the amount that you were told in your award letter. Now, when you submitted your application request, we know you sort of tried to estimate where your budget expenses were going to be and put them into categories. We realized that those were just estimates and things may have changed since then. So you can move things around between budget categories. You don't need to notify us of that. You just need to keep in mind that the total amount you're requesting reimbursement for can't exceed the total. And one of the biggest things when you're thinking about CARES Act funds and trying to determine if your expense is eligible for reimbursement or not is whether it was something that was on your normal planned budget, except for certain expenses related to payroll. But if it was part of your normal budget, then it most likely wouldn't be eligible for reimbursement. But if it's something over and above your normal or something different that you've had to purchase to respond to the pandemic, then there's a chance that it would be an eligible expense for reimbursement. So that's one of the big rules of thumb for the CARES Act reimbursements. And just keep in mind that any of the expenses that you're requesting reimbursement for can't overlap with anything you're receiving reimbursement from insurance, the Paycheck Protection Program, or other government or grant programs. So you can have received the PPP program but you just can't get reimbursements for those exact same salaries in the exact same time frame. You could get reimbursement for funds after your PPP funds ended for employees if your business was closed, for example. And just as a side note, we are recording this and we will have it available for you, and we will make the slides available as well. Okay, salaries and payroll, eligibility criteria. So eligible for reimbursement for salaries for the nonprofits are going to be additional hours over and above your pre-COVID levels for sanitation, or to meet increasing demand for services related to the COVID pandemic. For example, that could include if you have a part-time employee and due to the increased requests for, let's say, housing assistance, you've had to increase that part-time employee to full-time employee, then you could get reimbursed for the additional hours over and above that person's normal part-time pay. Or if you're asking employees to stay an extra hour or two every day, you could get reimbursed for sanitation purposes. You could get reimbursed for that. But it does have to be outside their normal, over and above their normal salaries and planned salaries as a direct result of the pandemic. Now, if you've had to hire some additional staff to meet increased demand for services, then those salaries could be eligible for reimbursement, again, during that March 1st to November 16th timeframe. And then if you had to close and you kept paying your employees even though they did not work during the closure, then those salaries could be eligible for reimbursement. Additionally, if you had to reduce hours due to the pandemic, but you still paid the employees their regular wages, you could get reimbursed for the difference between the hours they actually worked and their normal salary. And then you can also get reimbursement for the amount of pay over the normal salary if you paid hazard pay. What isn't eligible would be bonuses. And then any of the, as I said before, any of the regularly planned salaries, anything that you normally would have planned to pay out. Okay, so here's a little bit more of a specific in that example I mentioned earlier. So your nonprofit normally operates from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday to Friday for a total of 75 hours per week. Because of the pandemic, you've had to adjust the schedule for 6 weeks, and you've had to close early at 8 p.m. So how we would calculate reimbursement for the difference in payroll if you paid employees would be you'd enter your normal hours of operation into submittable, your actual hours during the reduced hour period, and that would show you the percent that's eligible for reimbursement based on your actual hours. You would take the payroll of the employees for that period that you paid regular wages to and come up with the amount that we could reimburse for. Again, this is an example of if you paid employees their regular wages during a period of reduced hours, this is how you would calculate how much you could be reimbursed for the difference between their regular pay and the actual hours they were working. And when you get into submittable, the only thing that you have to do is enter in the normal hours of operation, your actual hours during the period of reduced operations, and then your payroll. And submittable will do the calculations for you. So an example of the additional hours, we're saying due to increased demand, you had several employees that you were asking to work 2 additional hours per shift over and above their normal for a total of 10 hours each week additional for each employee. And so this chart shows you how much additional we would be able to reimburse for. And you would enter this information into Submittable as well. We'll have you break it out and provide pay stubs showing wages and hours worked. And you would be able to reimburse for the amount over and above their normal. Okay, payroll documentation. What we would usually look for for documentation would be, for example, a pay stub or a report from a payroll provider or from your QuickBooks report that for the time frame. And we'll be looking for the name of the employee, the hours worked, and the wages paid for the period of closure or reduced hours, if it's the situation where you were paying them even though they did not work during those times. If they're working over and above, we would be looking for proof of those hours. You would present that by providing their pay stubs, and then you'll enter information into Submittable about your closure periods or reduced hour periods. For new hires that you've hired due to increased demand for services, we would be looking for documentation of their hire date and then hours worked and wages paid on a pay stub, or again, on a QuickBooks report or a report from a payroll provider. Now, you'll also have to provide proof of payment. For all of the CARES Act reimbursements will require both the proof of the expense was incurred and proof of payment. So for payroll documentation, we would look for the organization's bank statement to show those outgoing funds, or perhaps copies of canceled payroll checks. For non-payroll expenses, eligible expenses include supplies over and above your pre-COVID levels due to increased demand for services, and then supplies related to the pandemic, such as COVID testing, cleaning supplies, specialized air filters, or PPE. Equipment that's eligible for the program would be equipment for sanitation, technology needed to pivot the delivery of services. That could include additional technology to provide more services virtually. It could include if the organization, if your nonprofit didn't already have a website and you're needing to have a website so you can do some virtual fundraising, getting that technology so that you can conduct virtual fundraising. It doesn't include actual fundraising events themselves, but it does include getting the technology so that you're able to do that going forward. And then also any equipment necessary for mitigation or social distancing. Facility reconfiguration is also an eligible cost. The facility reconfiguration needs to be specific to meeting social distancing requirements or to serving additional clients if you're needing additional space. And it can't be something that was previously planned, any previously planned renovation or upgrading. Direct assistance to at-risk individuals is also an eligible expense category. Keeping in mind that we would be able to reimburse your organization for direct assistance provided to individuals that's over and above the amount of direct assistance that your organization normally provides. Your organization is responsible for defining at risk. When you submitted your application, you were required to provide us with characteristics of clients to show that they're at risk. It may just be that they're low income, but there may be additional factors. We don't set that definition. We leave that to your organization. You know your clients and you know what their risks are, so we leave that in your hands to set sort of what the exact criteria is going to be. And then your organization is also responsible for keeping copies of any client bills related to direct assistance. Just some examples of the types of direct assistance that would be eligible, keeping in mind that we are reimbursing assistance that's related to basic needs. So rent or mortgage assistance could be eligible. Utility assistance is eligible, but you do need to keep in mind that we are not able to reimburse any payments made to a local municipality. And that's just part of the CARES Act guidance. So if someone comes to you needing assistance with their water or sewer bill, and that bill is paid to, the city water company or the city sewer provider, we would not be able to reimburse for that assistance. But if they have a private provider, if it's Ameren or Republic Waste or something like that, those providers we can provide direct assistance for. Food and hygiene assistance, transportation. For example, I know some organizations from time to time provide gas cards so that clients can get to employment, to health appointments, or to job training or educational classes. And then there would be some opportunity for other basic needs, but you would have to describe those. But the categories listed above are really the primary areas of basic needs, direct assistance that you could get reimbursed for. Okay, other eligible expenses. We know your organizations may have some other categories of eligible expenses related to the pandemic. So we do allow you to enter those into the system, but keeping in mind that they do have to be, again, unplanned, previously unbudgeted expenses resulting directly from the pandemic or directly resulting from a closure or reduced hours. They do, or enabling social distancing or to mitigate the spread of COVID, and otherwise fall within eligibility criteria for the program. And just as a reminder, the program guidelines are available on the Nonprofit Relief and Recovery website, just to check that if you're wondering about eligible expenses. And we will have some additional resources available for you to check on eligibility as well. Okay, so documentation, as I mentioned, you will have to provide first proof of expense of each of the items you would like reimbursement for. So for non-payroll documentation, you will be looking at receipts and invoices, most likely. And when we're looking at receipts and invoices, we want to make sure that those documents show the vendor or the store name, the date of the purchase, and or the service provided or the item purchased, the cost of the item, and the total amount on the invoice. So as you take a look at this slide, we've got an example. We've highlighted the eligible items and the kind of key information, what it was for, the hand washing station. It's total of $1,500 for that item. That's the only thing on this receipt that would be eligible. We can see the vendor name, who it's from. We can see who it was billed to. That's our company or your nonprofit. So this would be proof of an eligible expense for an invoice. This one is, specific to sanitation sort of stuff because of the pandemic. Proof of expense for supplies and direct assistance. Again, for supplies, that could be receipts or invoices. For direct assistance, we will be asking that you, instead of submitting all of your client bills, we will be asking for direct assistance that you provide us with a list of clients by either last name or some sort of client ID number of everyone that received during assistance for which you're asking reimbursement. In addition to their name, you will need to provide the date of assistance, the amount of assistance provided, and the type of assistance, the basic category of assistance that that individual received. It doesn't necessarily have to be in an Excel spreadsheet. This is just an example. I'm sure some of your organizations have your own programs that collect this information for you, but this is the information that we'll have to provide reimbursement of direct assistance. This would be your proof of expense. And then for supplies, it's going to be invoices and receipts, and we will ask that you indicate how much you spent in supplies pre-COVID and what you're asking for reimbursement for now. And the same thing for direct assistance. As I mentioned earlier, we're only able to reimburse for those costs that are over and above pre-COVID levels. So you will have to make a sort of a statement in there where you're indicating what those pre-COVID level dollar amount expenses were and what they are now that you're asking reimbursement for. Proof of payment is the second piece that you'll have to provide for each expense you want reimbursement for. So proof of payment could be the organization's bank statement. If you're providing a bank statement as proof of payment, we'll need to be able to see the name of the bank, your organization's name, the period, and then the dates of the charges. And we would ask that you highlight any relevant eligible expenses that will be matching up to receipts. So here's an example. You can see that we highlighted everything that's important, everything that we'll need to see to match up those expenses and show that those expenses were paid. If you wrote a check, then obviously there would be check numbers in there as well. There are also a number of examples. If you do online banking, proof of payment could be, the electronic printout of the check that shows the date that the check cleared the bank as well. So that could work as proof of payment as well. A credit card statement, similar to the bank statement, the credit card statement would need to be in your organization's name, with all of the eligible expenses clearly marked. We would be able to need to see the name of the organization on each page with the charges. So that's just something to keep in mind so that we can match the name, the organization's name with the charges. If the name isn't on every page, in this example it is, usually there's the last four of the account number. And so if that's the case, if there's no name but an account number, we would just need a secondary piece that matches the account number to the name. Now, we on both the bank statements and the credit card statements and any other bills, you are welcome to black out or redact any other private information. We usually just need the last four account numbers. You can black out Social Security numbers except for the last 2 to 4 numbers. We don't need full numbers on any of those things. Any other charges that you want to black out, you're welcome to do that. We just need to see the expenses that you're requesting reimbursement for. Okay, just some things to keep in mind to fast track your reimbursement. You will be listing all of your expenses on a reimbursement worksheet that is linked in Submittable on the reimbursement form. When you're listing eligibility reasons on this worksheet, make sure you use language from the program guidelines. For example, if you enter in an expense, the date, the vendor, we will ask you to enter the reason. And it's helpful if you use language, again, from the guidelines, such as purchase to enable social distancing, or the expense was incurred as a direct result of a closure. And if it's an item that there's a chance we might not know what that item is just from the name of it, if it's something very specific to the type of services, it's not a self-explanatory name of a piece of equipment or something like that, you might provide a little description of what that item is for us, just to help speed things along so we don't have to come back with questions. The additional details you can provide just means that we'll have less questions for you, and things will go just a little bit more quickly in getting your reimbursement out to you. So any additional details you can provide on that worksheet, the better. Again, make sure it's easy to see what you're requesting reimbursement for in your documentation. Make sure you highlight all of the eligible expenses on both your invoices and receipts and on your bank statements and credit statements where you're showing the proof of payment. Make sure that's visible. And it's also helpful if you highlight the relevant information like the date and who the vendor was, those kinds of things. Scan your documents in groups based on the reimbursement form. So when you go into submittable, and Maggie's going to talk to you about that in a little bit, you will have to group your expenses by category. So when you scan your documents in preparation, you will scan all of your payroll items together, all of your supplies together, and all of your facility reconfiguration together. So as you're preparing your documents for submission, you can go ahead and group them by category. And then you can put them in order by proof of expense and proof of payment for each category. Okay, so I am going to hand it over to Maggie now, and she's going to talk to you about submittable.
Kim, I think before we go into submittable, it might be helpful if we cover a few of the questions that came in through the chat. So I'm going to read these off for you, and then we'll do the best to answer some of these questions that we can. So first of all, will the slides be available yet later? Yes, they will, and the presentation is going to be recorded, as Kim mentioned. Will the reimbursement link and other communication only be sent to the executive director of the agency or the grant contact listed in the application? The answer to that is it will be sent to the executive director, but we will provide some communication to the contact on the application to let them know once the reimbursement has been opened and that note and invitation into submittable has been sent. We'll do that. And thank you for that question. Is December 30th the expected reimbursement payout date, or rather the last possible day that will most reimbursements be paid prior to that date? So December 30th is the last possible date for reimbursement. Reimbursements will be processed continuously up to December 30th, so it is possible that you will receive your reimbursement prior to that date, but that is the final date that you could possibly receive reimbursement. What if we were unable to pay hazard pay until we knew we got this grant? Is it okay to back pay before mid-November, so between March 1st and November 16th, the hazard pay they should have received? Kim, I'm going to let you answer that question.
And I think that's something that if you would shoot me an email, I think that's probably something that we need to discuss and take a look at. I mean, I think that probably looks more like bonus pay, but we can certainly take a look at it. Brenda, do you have thoughts on that?
Sorry, it is taking me just a second. I agree with you, Kim. I think we need to check with our legal team and stuff to make sure that it meets that sort of payment after the fact like that meets the guidelines for the federal reimbursement stuff. So I think yeah, we'll just have to check on that.
Next question. So what about staff who continued to work during the pandemic but could have been furloughed or let go during the pandemic? For example, our daycare center is operating with the normal staffing even though the number of children is reduced, and technically the staff to child ratio would be met with less staff.
Unfortunately, if they kept working and were paid during that time, we are not able to reimburse those costs. The guidance is very specific on, the federal guidance is very specific on when we can reimburse those salaries. So Unfortunately, just to, make sure and protect your organization so you wouldn't have to pay back any funds, we aren't able to reimburse those. We are only able to reimburse if someone was paid but did not work. And then for reduced hours, if they were paid normal wages but only worked, part-time.
Next question, our bank lumps all of our payroll together. Do we need to separate it out?
I think if you're able to provide, you would provide two pieces of documentation for that. You would provide a listing of payroll and highlight the salaries that we would be reimbursing. And then you would show the bank statement where we could match up the total amount on your printout, your payroll printout, to the bank statement amount that was taken out. And then we'd be able to see the, you'd also have, itemized there the individuals we're reimbursing for. So that would be the appropriate documentation there.
If payment happens on November 15th, we would not have a canceled check yet or bank statement. How do we provide proof of payment for that purchase?
That one would be, you might not be able to include those expenses if you aren't able to get some sort of proof of payment, whether it's an electronic printout. I mean, we would be able to accept an electronic printout if you paid perhaps with a debit card. That would probably show up on your bank electronic banking. And so if you could print out the charge that way, we would be able to accept that.
So Kim, for bonuses, what if they were paid to full-time exempt employees as a way to reimburse them for overtime worked?
That would not be eligible, I don't believe.
Okay.
Is that,
I think
would that
we
be
can.
your understanding, Brenda?
I agree, because I think that you would have to be able to document that the overtime, that it was overtime for the pay periods to be able to show that it was in excess, right?
Yeah. And I think that looks, again, more like a bonus.
Yep. Can we include loss of income?
You cannot. Loss of income, loss of fundraising income, and revenue replacement are not eligible expenses.
And that's based on the federal guidelines, Kim, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yep. Can gift cards be used for food cost reimbursements?
They can, yes. You can provide gift cards for food for direct assistance. You'll just need to keep a list of who you're providing those to so that you can document that for us.
Can the agency assist tenants with rental assistance if the service provider owns the property? Also, can renovation costs be included for adding a bathroom to expand shelter space?
Okay, so the first question was, can you provide rent assistance if the organization itself is who charges the rent? I think that's probably a no. And then the second question, Maggie, on facility reconfiguration?
Can renovation costs be included for adding a bathroom to expand shelter space?
If you can document that you had to expand that space due to increased demand or for social distancing purposes, then yes, you could include those costs.
Our prevention program provides households with bedding, dishes, clothing, etc. as basic need items to help families move into stable housing or stay in housing. Are these eligible under basic needs? Are food gift cards eligible? We've already answered the food question. Under food costs, marked no alcohol, tobacco, and that it's food only.
Right. I think something to keep in mind when you're looking at those items for furnishing and housing is, number one, that it has to be over and above any of your previous levels of expenses for those items. And then I think too, we're really looking at the very basic needs like food, rent, perhaps some of the very basic furnishings would be eligible. But you may want to send a specific email and to our department, and we can take a look at that if you want to list exactly what you're looking at, and we can try and help clarify that.
On the statement of pre-COVID expenses, is this just a verbal statement, or do you want copies of invoices / payments of pre-COVID expenses?
So you will be stating what those expenses are, and then you also will be providing some form of documentation, and it's going to be spelled out in submittable for you to show what those expenses were. Usually it's going to be for the corresponding months or the corresponding period in 2019 to show those increased expenses. But yes, you would have to provide like an expense statement or something like that for the previous year.
If paying by check, does the vendor have to cash the check before 11/16 in order for the expense to be reimbursable?
Usually we do need to see that the check has cleared the bank for proof of payment. So yes.
This one is specific to the Rock Castle invoice for hand washing stations. They will need to submit the invoice and show proof of payment of that same bill. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Can you review a little bit about utility assistance and which utility companies cannot be included, Kim?
Yeah. So just an example, and I don't offhand know all the different providers in your different areas, but for example, here in Jefferson City, the city is sort of divided in half, and half of the city provides, the water provider is Missouri American Water, and half of the city pays their water, and it's operated by the Jefferson City Public Works Department. So if someone submitted their water bill and they paid it to Missouri American Water, that would be eligible for reimbursement. But if that individual paid their water to the Jefferson City Public Works, it would not be eligible for reimbursement because that's a local municipality provider.
And
So
again, that's tied to federal guidance that says that those municipalities cannot have revenue replacement. So know that that's something that's a little bit beyond our control, but we just have to be very careful about which utilities we can cover. Kim, did you want to finish your statement there?
No, I think you're good. So yeah, I mean, American, if it's a co-op that's private, it's not, again, it's not municipality owned and operated, then it would be eligible for reimbursement. I think in some smaller communities, the water, sewer, and sometimes electric is operated by the local municipality. So unfortunately, in those small communities, we probably wouldn't be able to do much in the way of reimbursement. But a lot of times, the electric is provided by someone separately, and it's just maybe the water and sewer that's operated by the local government, the municipality. So you'll just need to check on those bills and see who they're making their payments to determine if it can be reimbursed. If it's the city, the county, or some other city or county agency, municipality, it wouldn't be eligible for reimbursement.
So Kim, if a standard amount of food assistance is purchased from a grocery store or wholesaler, can a single invoice per vendor support this direct assistance, with the amount per voucher serving as the cost per item. The total number of individuals receiving assistance can be reported through programmatic. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand that question, Maggie. Could you say it one more time for me, please?
Yep, I will. So they verbatim, they wrote, if a standardized amount of food assistance is purchased from a grocery store or wholesaler, can a single invoice per vendor support this direct assistance with the amount per voucher serving as the cost per item be submitted? The total number of individuals receiving assistance can be reported through programmatic.
Well, it could if you're still able to list out each of the individuals that are receiving assistance from that one specific invoice. If you're submitting it under direct assistance, I would think that that would be more under a supply category. So under supplies, just the invoice, yes, would be acceptable. And then you'd show proof of payment as well. It depends how you're dispersing your food. Generally, if it's direct assistance, I would say that it would be you're providing like a gift card for food. If you're a food bank or a food pantry and you are distributing food, I would classify that as a supply and list it under supply. And then you won't be providing a list of everyone that receives food from you. It's going to depend on how you give out that food assistance, whether it's in the form of monetary or the actual food items. Because if it's the food items, you'll just list it as a supply and then the invoices work.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to handle it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if our nonprofit does reimbursement for items purchased, it would not show on our bank statements, just receipts. How do you want them to handle reimbursements, Kim?
So if you do reimbursements for items that you previously purchased, I'm assuming your bank statements would show the charge when you purchased them, whether that was back in March or April. Am I understanding the question? I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
I think there could be a couple of ways to go with this question, Kim, and perhaps the person will clarify in the chat later on. But I think, can you talk a little bit about like the examples that we've discussed where if, let's say, an employee of the nonprofit is reimbursed for expenses, how you want them to record that reimbursement?
Okay, so if an employee of the nonprofit makes a purchase for the organization?
Yes.
Okay. So if an employee has been given authority to make a purchase, we would have to see a copy of the receipt for whatever was purchased. We would have to see a copy of the employee's bank statement or credit card statement or whatever they used to make that payment. Then we would have to see a copy of the check or the funds transfer from the organization to the employee for the exact amount as reimbursement of that cost. And all of that would have to be within the eligible time frame, the March 1 to the November 16th. So we'd have to see every piece of documentation to track that, to track the expense, how it was originally paid, and then how that employee was reimbursed.
Okay, next question. Does it matter if the dates of bills are outstanding or were from before the start of the grant? For example, this person has a client with past due utility bills from 2011 or 2005. It is a barrier to them being able to move out on their own. Can we pay? What if bills are from a vendor in another state? So let's maybe start with the first one on the predating the March 1st.
Right, okay. Unfortunately, we cannot pay bills outside the grant period. Those would technically be incurred. The services that the client received were incurred pre-pandemic. So keeping in mind that sort of first rule of thumb, all of the costs have to be related to the pandemic and within that time frame. So if there are utility bills incurred even, last year in November, that was before the pandemic ever started. So it cannot be tied back to the pandemic. So only bills where the services started March 1st on could be reimbursed by these funds, because your clients would have those bills and those issues regardless of the pandemic. And why, while I understand it's clearly important and those are barriers for them, those would be issues they'd have regardless of the pandemic.
So Kim, next part of that question, if bills are from a vendor in another state, is that eligible?
What kind of bills would be looking? I mean, I'm guessing it would be like a utility bill. Brenda, do you have thoughts? I guess so.
I think we can clarify this in our FAQ. I think we might want to discuss this, but it's a good question, and we appreciate you guys bringing it in. We'll make sure that we post FAQs as we go forward. I want to kind of keep us moving too, so that we have time to go through the submittable documentation. So I'm going to cover another couple of questions, and then for anyone who doesn't get their question answered this round, once I get done going through the submittable information, at the end, we'll use whatever time we have left to go ahead and go through those questions if you can hang around, and we'll try to get you out on time today. And if we can't get to everyone's question, again, as I mentioned, we'll be sure to post FAQs after the call, and also we'll be posting the presentation and all of the materials that we have here. So, okay, so next question. For direct assistance reimbursements, you said to provide a list of names, dates, amounts. Do we still need to provide proof of expense and proof of payment for each client instance of assistance on that list?
You will not need to provide proof of expense for each client. We will not require you to provide a copy of each of their bills, but you will need to keep those records. You will have to provide the proof of payment for each of those bills, though.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna close this there. I know we've gotten a lot more questions in the chat, and I'm sure that there are some that are probably clarifications to earlier questions. We'll make sure and go through. While I'm talking, Kim, you might take a look at those questions and see if you can answer some of those directly in the chat. And I will just send you, for any that have come in to me personally, I'm going to just do a quick send over to you for what I've got. Okay, so you should have my chat log, Kim, and you can kind of go through and answer those in the chat for everybody else. Okay. So we have been working incredibly hard to get an entirely new system up and running for you guys to make this process as streamlined as we can. And that tool is called Submittable. You might be familiar with it with other grants that you use. The first thing that is going to happen whenever we open reimbursement is your executive director is going to get a couple of emails from us. The first email will be confirming that we've created an account for your organization in Submittable. And then the second email will be a request to submit your reimbursement form. And it'll look a little bit like what we have here on the screen. And then also, as I mentioned, this will be sent to your executive officer, but we will send a separate communication from DED to notify the grant contact that has been sent. Kim, would you advance the slide for me there? So once you get that email from Submittable, it's going to look like the screenshot on the left there. You'll want to click a View Form, and then that will prompt you to log in with your new Submittable account information, and that will take you directly in to the reimbursement form. Next slide. From there, it is very important that you have registered for Missouri Buys or that you have submitted your vendor input. You cannot receive payment from the state unless you have completed one of these two things. You don't have to do both. You only have to do either the Missouri buys information or you have to submit that vendor input. There are instructions in the information that we've sent to you, and we'll be including that on our grant page for you if you haven't done that already, but this is incredibly important, and we expect that that might slow down our process if we don't have those completed. Go ahead and keep going, Kim. Next, the first thing that you'll do on the form after you've submitted your Missouri buys information is you'll tell us what categories you're requesting reimbursement for. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of noise in the background. I apologize. After you do that, you're going to tell us a little bit about why your expenses qualify. So for example, we have this language here on the salaries question, and it basically aligns with the program guidelines. So this is going to help us to make the case that the expenses that you're submitting are eligible. And I would say if you don't think that your expenses qualify under one of these categories, you need to take a look at the program guidelines and submit it in the other category and give us a good justification in the description that's asked for why you think that it fits within the program guidelines. Next slide. Okay, so in addition, if you experience closure or you experienced reduced hours, we're going to ask you some questions about that closure period and whether and what those dates were that you were closed or what the dates were that you experienced those reduced hours, and provide us a little bit of information about the reason for that closure. It could have been because of a local ordinance. It could have been because you didn't feel like you could operate safely, and or you were reconfiguring your facility to be able to do that. Those kinds of things would be great things to include in that little description box that we give you to give us additional justification so that when we pass your reimbursement request on to the Office of Administration, there's absolutely no question that you're eligible for the expenses that you're requesting reimbursement for. Next slide. Next, you're going to, we will be providing a template worksheet for you to list out all of the expenses that you're requesting and what categories you want those to fall under. This is where you're going to list each of the items that you will be submitting documentation for, and we will use this list to compare to the documentation that you've submitted to make sure that we have everything we need to pass your reimbursement request on to the Office of Administration for payment. Next slide. That form looks a little bit like this. So you can see you'll have columns for the category that you are requesting under. Oh, can you go back? Thank you. You'll have the invoice date. You'll have the vendor name. You'll have the invoice or receipt number. You'll give us a little bit of a description about what was purchased. And then in this next column where it says COVID purpose, we want you to give us an explanation of how this was connected to COVID-19. Again, providing that explanation that justifies why you should receive this under the program guidelines. So it's very helpful in this column if you give us language that emulates what we have in our program guidelines. Finally, you'll tell us the amount on the invoice or receipt and the amount requested on and if you had items that were on the receipt that you are not asking for reimbursement for, you can list that cost here as well. It is very important that you do not change the formatting of the spreadsheet. It will delay the approval process. In addition, on the next slide, within that worksheet, that Excel document that we're giving you, we've also listed some examples for how you would fill things out. Really appreciate any feedback or questions you guys have, and we'll go over how to submit those questions to us later on, but we've given you just a few examples in the workbook to help you walk through that process. Next slide. Back on the submittable form, once you've gone through and filled out your worksheet, it will auto-calculate off to the right the totals for each category as you've gone through and selected. You want to enter those amounts for your total reimbursement requested, the amount for each category that you're requesting funds from, and this will give us those totals that we can report on and that we can approve. Again, your total reimbursement requested cannot exceed the total amount that you were approved for in your initial application and award letter. you can flex across these categories. So perhaps you requested $50,000 total, but whenever you filled out your initial application, you didn't quite get your salary number right, you can move that across. And I would also say too, that if, as we've been going through and talking this morning about eligibility, if you're concerned that a certain expense might not be eligible, think about other categories that perhaps you've had expenses that would qualify and enter those there. Okay, let's keep going. So we've talked a lot about documentation. Within Submittable, it's a simple drag and drop field to upload documents to the form. You can upload up to 74 attachments, or if you want to be really kind, you can merge those all together in one PDF for us. It's entirely up to you. What we will be asking is that you submit your record of expense, so your invoices and receipts, in one section, which you can see here, that first field, and then you submit your proof of payment, so your bank statement or those canceled checks, in the second section. And the purpose behind this is to keep all of this documentation organized for our reviewers so we can get through our review as quickly as possible. Over the next month or so, we're going to have about 2,000 applicants that are going to be going through the review process across all of our different CARES Act programs. So it's going to be incredibly important that you provide us the documentation in as organized a way as possible to make it really quick and easy for the reviewers to see that you're eligible and that you have all of your documentation submitted. Next. Finally, Kim mentioned in a couple of places we will have some tables that you will fill out to tell us how much you're eligible for. So for example, if you had reduced hours, you're going to tell us your normal hours in operation, then you're going to tell us the actual hours that you had during COVID-19, and that will give us an idea of that reduction, and then we'll be able to prorate your eligible amount based on that reduction in hours. So in the form, we'll do the calculation for you. You'll just need to carry this amount over and make sure that it matches with what you entered in the fields earlier on, those expense fields. Keep going. Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about the outcome measure questions? Oops. So on this piece, it sounds like Kim might be having a little bit of trouble getting off mute. On this particular piece, yep, that's okay. You want to go ahead and talk about the slide?
Yeah. Sorry, we just have a couple of outcome measures questions after you're done entering everything else. Again, just a couple of easy questions. We will ask that you tell us the number of individuals that you served during the time frame for receiving reimbursements, March 1st to 11/16, as a direct result of funds. So we would only be looking for the number of clients served because of these funds, whether it's over and above your pre-COVID level of clients, or if you didn't see an increase in clients, but the funds enabled you to, help keep the doors open or social distance so you could continue serving however many clients you served, that would be the only number reported on. You wouldn't report on the total number your agency serves altogether if these funds did not impact other programs or other clients. It would just be those clients directly impacted by these funds. And we will ask you to indicate the areas of priority under which the clients were served, meaning how many did you serve, like through in meeting food insecurity needs or homelessness prevention or academic support. So we'll be asking you to identify categories and then indicating the number served under each of those categories. And then for food banks and pantries, we'll have a question where we're just asking you about additional pounds of food distributed because of these funds, or that these funds will be reimbursing for. So that pretty much just covers what the outcome questions are going to be.
Okay, and then the last thing that you do is complete the attestation here, where you provide the executive officer's initials. Hopefully they're filling this section out, and then you submit your form. So that covers the submittable form. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the functionality in Submittable on the next slide, Kim. So at any point in this process, you can save your work and come back to it. It'll be saved to your Submittable account. All you have to do is click the Save Draft button, and that will happen. You can also view the status of your submission once you've submitted it at any time in your Submittable account. So you can see we've been doing a lot of testing recently, and this screenshot kind of shows all of the items that I've submitted into Submittable, and you can see those different statuses. Next slide, please. So if off to the left there it says received, then that means that your submission is awaiting review. If it says in progress, that means that we've opened your submission to begin review on it. If it says completed, that means that review is complete and your submission has been sent to the Office of Administration and is being processed for payment. If it says accepted, that means that the Office of Administration with the state government has reviewed your reimbursement request and approved it, and that payment is on its way. And hopefully we don't reach this point, but if it says declined, it means that none of your expenses were deemed eligible. And if we do get to that point, we will share information that's on your review with you so that you can see the reasoning why you were declined. And that also goes for if we approve a partial amount of your reimbursement, we'll also be sharing that with you. But again, our goal is to help you to receive your full reimbursement request. And we've done a few things along the way to make sure that you can do that. Number one is allowing you to flex across those categories. You can't receive more than your total reimbursement amount, but you can flex if you think that there are areas that maybe you estimated a little bit high on your initial application form, you'll be able to move across that. The other thing that we're doing, and I'm not sure if Kim mentioned this earlier, I apologize if we didn't, but you'll be able to submit 120% of expenses of what you had previously. So you can give us more. You just can't be approved for more than what you were initially approved for. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of padding to make sure that you are approved for your full amount. Next slide. So you can also view activity messages and even make edits to your application form. One of the challenges that we had with the DocuSign system is, I know some of you are aware, is that we weren't able to accept additional documentation if documentation was missing. So you can go in, maybe you made a typo on something, we will open the form for editing for you, or you can request that we open the form for editing if you think of something after you hit submit. And we're happy to do that to help you get to the point where you receive your full reimbursement request. Next slide. So finally, if you get stuck, we're here for you. Again, we're going to be posting today's presentation online. We're also going to be developing FAQs that we will post, as well as some how-to videos that'll walk you through some of the specifics of navigating these forms. We're also going to be spinning up a help desk so that we can make sure that we are quickly moving through any questions that we get and answering those, and that we're updating our FAQs with those frequently asked questions that we're getting coming in. And we'll be sharing that information with you as we launch the reimbursement form. And then finally, if you go out to the DED website, there is a helpful chat function that you'll be able to use. And we'll be updating that in the coming days as we launch reimbursement so that it'll answer some of the questions that we've gotten today and that we'll continue to get throughout the week as we do our additional trainings on this. So happy to, we're gonna take some time here. We've got a little bit of time left. I think we want to turn back over to the questions, Kim. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look through those questions that I sent to you or the additional ones that came in the chat, but let's go ahead and walk through some of those.
Yeah, Maggie. And so just a couple of things real quick. I know originally when applications were submitted, the guidelines did originally say that there would be 2 opportunities to submit requests for reimbursements, just because of the time that it took us to review all of those applications and get notifications back out. We did have to make a change to that. So now there is just you just have one opportunity to submit your request for reimbursement. So everything has to be in your one submission, and your submission has to be turned in to us with all of the supporting documentation by November 16th at 5 p.m. I've seen some questions about salaries. It can include like the payroll expenses, but it wouldn't include accounting fees. It can include like the total salary and benefit minus 401k and then any of the accounting fees that are mentioned. You would just put those all together in your salary amounts. Salaries for employees, keep in mind, I mean, if those salaries were on the budget pre-COVID, if those were planned salaries that you would have paid, we cannot reimburse those salaries if the employees worked. We can't reimburse if you paid them and they worked. Okay. Maggie, have you had a chance to look through a couple that you wanted to kind of touch on?
Yep, I can give you a few here. So can we submit billing costs associated with the technology we have purchased to pivot service delivery, i.e. subscription costs? Can we include payment for these subscription costs that are annual?
You would have to prorate those for the period of the grant reimbursement. So it'd have to be prorated for March 1 to November 16th.
Yep. And I just wanted to come back to the question about bank statements because we've seen that one several times. So you can print from your online account access to provide evidence of your bank statements if you have purchases that get close to that 11/16 deadline. So hopefully you'll be able to use those electronic statements as your documentation.
Absolutely.
Next question.
Yeah.
Being a small organization that houses homeless persons, we submitted for a professional cleaning crew to disinfect the organization. This was written within the grant. Is this still acceptable? Also, what if we do not have our credit card statement or return check bank statement back by then? So again, as we mentioned, you can use your electronic statement. Kim, do you want to answer the question about the cleaning crew?
Yeah, the cleaning crew would still be eligible if you hired them for COVID-related sanitation. Yes, that could be eligible for reimbursement.
Perfect. Next question, regarding proof of payment, what about uncleared checks? So I think we covered this one a little bit. Our check cut dates will bump up against the November 16th deadline, so I'm concerned all payments may not have cleared the bank by 11/16.
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to look either for electronic funds transfers or debit card uses for those checks. If you're talking about payroll, that may be something that we can provide an update on a little bit later. We'll put in the FAQs about payroll if we'll allow the payroll and then a statement, your payroll statements up until the 16th. So we'll provide an update on that part of it in the FAQs. But otherwise, we do need to see that the checks are cleared with the bank. So really looking for the electronic statements or, again, electronic debits, something like that.
Kim, if the organization is having to pay for extra staff due to COVID, an increase in services, can they submit for that?
Yes, they can. If you've hired new staff to meet increased demand, then that is eligible. You will have to show hire date of those employees so that we can see that they were hired after March 1, and you can reimburse those.
Regarding proof of payment, all checks are direct deposit. It will show the net amount. Is that an issue?
I think that's fine as long as you can show a printout. I'm assuming this is payroll.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you can show a printout and we can match up the totals.
Okay. Our agency went to 50% work, but all employees were paid in full. Can we apply for reimbursement?
I'm sorry, Maggie, can you repeat that one more time?
Yep. So the organization went to 50% work. So I assume that means that they cut their hours in half by 50%. The workers were not working, but they were still paid in full. Can they apply for reimbursement?
Yes, they could get reimbursement for it would come out to probably half of that. And there's a worksheet in submittable that helps you calculate that.
For payroll, does this include those who worked additional hours due to COVID over and above their normal hours? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yep, the wording on that one was a little tricky. Can hazard pay be reimbursed given to employees funds to, sorry, I'm gonna have to reword this one a little bit. Can hazard pay be reimbursed if it was given to employees to return to the field and work directly with homeless clients, or is that considered a bonus, even though it was approved by a board as hazard pay?
So I think the question is was it documented as hazard pay in addition to the regular wages, and you can see like the amount and the hours? And I guess was it already, paid out? And that may be something that I think Brenda and I mentioned we'll talk to legal and put an update on that to clarify what would qualify it as a bonus and what would qualify it as hazard pay in the FAQs. But I think that part of it is going to be, a bonus. If you're just putting out a $500 bonus, that's certainly not going to be eligible because people worked extra hours or, it was bad conditions and they still worked. Hazard pay has to be directly related to a rate of pay over and above and directly tied to the number of hours worked. So that's one of the big differences. But again, we'll put some more information and details on that in the FAQs and responses to these.
You mentioned earlier that these funds couldn't be to plan for COVID-19 beyond the award date of 11/16. Many of us knew we needed major equipment in response to COVID-19, but didn't have the funds to cover those costs until now. If we are only just now purchasing those items because of this award, is that going to damage our eligibility for that equipment expense?
If you are purchasing equipment that during this time frame that you need because of the pandemic, then it is eligible, even if you're going to keep using it for the however long. Obviously, if we're going to purchase it, we want you to keep using it during this period of the pandemic. It's not just because the expenses have to be incurred during the time frame. Doesn't necessarily mean that the use of the items you buy has to end at the same time because the pandemic isn't ending. Does that answer the question? So yes, that equipment would still be eligible. I think an example, we've had some food banks that they're needing additional freezer space because they're serving a lot more clients. And so they're having to get larger shipments and stuff like that. So could they purchase another freezer? They need it because of COVID, because they're seeing increased demand, and they're going to continue using it after November 16th. That would be an eligible expense.
Very good. So this person read that they are allowed to allocate funds from the grant to other approved lines. So they're talking about crossing across categories and kind of flexing their award amount across categories differently than they had listed in their initial application. They mentioned the specific example that they have received some donations for the items that they had initially requested for. So masks, cleaning supplies, those kinds of things, which, if they weren't allowed to flex, it would decrease the amount that they would need to purchase. The answer to this question is yes, you can flex across those categories as you need to. You are approved for your total award amount, and you can apply that across eligible expenses as long as you have documentation for those expenses. Next question regarding technology equipment. Kim, this organization, they say they were not prepared to do things online. They give Zoom as an example. Are computers with cameras and microphones an eligible expense?
Yes. So if you had to purchase those things to be able to continue operations and to serve clients virtually, then yes, those are eligible expenses.
Yep. And I would say too, in that particular example, I think that's an example of trying to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and encourage social distancing. If you're wanting to have meetings or things like that where you can keep staff distant or keep distance from customers, and you want to just include that language from the program guidelines in your description of that cost. Next question, under transportation cost eligibility, would car repairs be eligible?
I think if you had car repairs, that's really probably going to be the exception. I think, you're going to need to be able to try and specify that it's related to job or employment, and I think that's a little bit difficult to do with car repairs. And also, I think you would want to see a limit to the dollar amount to any one individual. I think, yes, a small amount, but it would need to be the minority of your expenses.
Next question, Kim. Some basic needs have smaller increments, cold weather items for homeless individuals who are left outside because of reduced shelter capacity due to COVID-19. How would we report every individual receiving gloves or hats, for example?
I think when you're doing gloves and hats and you're just distributing them to individuals, I think that falls under supplies more than it does direct assistance. When it's that kind of stuff, when you're not collecting names or collecting, copies of bills or income statements or anything like that. When you're talking about distribution of things to homeless individuals that are smaller like that, I think that falls under supplies. And so you would just show the total, like an invoice for all of the gloves and blankets that you purchased.
Back to the earlier question about lost revenue. If we incurred lost revenue from daycare fees due to closure, are we able to request reimbursement?
No, you are not.
Next question. We started making purchases in the last 2 weeks when we were approved and may not yet have bank statements. We've kind of covered that a little bit. The electronic bank statements, they say, but that may not capture everything. Is there something else we could provide? I think the answer to this is that we really need you to be able to provide evidence of payment. And if you can provide that electronic bank statement, if that purchase is cleared, then we should be able to see that on your bank statement, I think. But certainly if you have examples of what else you could provide, I think you could maybe submit that to our help desk and we can take a look at it and provide some clarification there.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is that, also maybe look back at things that you've incurred since March 1st. If there were some, if you've purchased some masks and gloves and things like that maybe you hadn't originally included, you may be able to include some of those things if there are a few things here at the end that you aren't able to get documentation for.
Yep, absolutely. We want to make sure that we're doing what we can to help you guys get your full award amounts. Regarding facility reconfiguration, a covered walk-up window, is there anything specifically that we should be cautious of? I'm not sure the question there. It sounds like if you're creating a covered walk-up window, then and you can document that it was somehow helping you to enable social distancing or prevent the spread of the disease, then I think that would be eligible. Kim, any other thoughts?
No, I'm in agreement.
Yep. I think we've already answered the professional cleaning crew question. I'm going back over a page that I did before. Okay, I want to be clear. If we don't have a clear check by 11/16, does this mean we will not be reimbursed? And are there any options available. We would like to purchase a laptop. The desktop is not equipped with this capability to facilitate case management to some of our clients outside of the community. Is this allowable, correct?
Well, I think first is the reason for the purchase of the laptop, is that something you needed anyway, or is this like for virtual sort of situation if they're outside of the community? I'm assuming that's the case, and maybe it has to do with social distancing. But that's the first question is it, because of COVID, or is it something you'd be purchasing anyway? And then the second thing is if you were to go ahead and purchase it now with a credit card or a debit card or something like, or an order online, I would assume that you would be able to provide proof of payment through online electronic statements in the next couple of weeks. I would think that it should have posted at least electronically, even if you don't have the mailed statements back. Did I interpret that question right, Maggie?
Yes, I think so. I think that's correct. I think the bottom line here is that we really need to be able to see evidence that that payment has come through, and you may have to, use a debit card or something like that to be able to make sure that that clears and that we have evidence there. Do you prefer to receive only one request for reimbursement for our entire grant amount, or can we submit one this week in a portion for a portion and one for the remainder closer to November 16th? The answer to this is that you have one opportunity to, and that's because of the amount of time that we have left to process everyone's reimbursement requests. So you'll need to submit one request for reimbursement. As proof of pre-COVID expenses for the corresponding month in 2019, would a QuickBooks expense statement be sufficient, or do we need to provide invoices, receipts, etc. for each expense in that month?
I think we'll just be looking for the
QuickBooks statement.
QuickBooks statement, yeah.
Yep. We are a Boys and Girls Club, and we are in the process of purchasing new football helmets that are equipped with safety shields to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Will this purchase qualify?
Yes, I would assume that would be an eligible expense.
Yep, and I would say too, the key there is that Randy told us that these football helmets have shields to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So using that language from the grant will help you to make that justification that your expenses are eligible. Next question, what if I have a personal credit card and I will be using it to purchase computers or technology? Could I use a receipt of my credit card to show the purchase?
We are going to allow that. I think as long as you show each piece of the documentation, you'll have to show the receipt, you'll have to show your own bank statement or credit card statement rather, and then we'll also have to see the piece where the nonprofit organization reimbursed the individual for that purchase. We'll have to, and where, if they cut a check to that person, where that check cleared the bank. We'll have to see all of those pieces to connect it and reimburse. It can't just be the receipt and the proof of your payment for the item. If it was a credit card in like a board officer's name or executive director or something, we have to see that the organization reimbursed the individual as well.
So the next question, and we've got about 7 minutes left. And again, if we don't get to your question today, we will go through, we'll save the chat log and the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we post these on our FAQs, responses to your questions. And that will also, if there's any doubt about bank statements or things like that, we'll make sure that we have some very clear language in our FAQs that address that. Next question, is there a template form to see or work on before entering the system? My answer to this would be, you can enter that system, you can save your form as a draft. You don't have to worry about going in and opening it. There's no issue there. So I would just encourage you to go ahead and go in, open your submittable information and take a look at that form. We will not have a separate form for you to look at. You can download the worksheets that are required. You'll be able to download those and look at those. But again, you can open that submittable form and do all kinds of things, enter things, save your work. And so you'll be able to do that rather than having a separate form that you have to go into. Got a couple of questions about hazard pay. I think we will make sure that we post answers to those on our FAQ, so be on the lookout for that. We will also provide some clarification on out-of-state vendors across that, understanding that certainly there are going to be expenses for supplies and things like that that will come from out-of-state vendors. Next question, can IT-related expenses be reimbursable for programs being set up to work from home for employees because of the pandemic, software and hardware?
So yes, if you had to make some of those purchases and they are used for continuing operations and to allow for social distancing, then yes, those pieces of equipment would be eligible.
Next question, will agencies be notified for items billed but not being reimbursed, and why? And the answer to that is if we award you for a partial award amount, then yes, we will make available to you the reason behind our decision on that. Again, our goal is to allow you to submit for as much as possible so that we don't have that situation and we approve you for your full award amount, but we will provide an explanation if you are only approved for a partial amount.
And I was just going to reiterate what, sorry, I was just going to reiterate what you said earlier, Maggie, because I didn't say it, in the beginning, is that you will be able to submit receipts for 20% over your approved amount. So if we find some things that aren't eligible, we'll have some additional expenses there to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's a good clarification, Kim. Kim's answer in the chat, the last day to apply for the reimbursement is November 16th. Can you submit requests after that? Submit requests after that date. Can you clarify how we can submit requests after that date? So I think, Kim, what you were meaning there is that if we ask for additional documentation, they'll be able to submit items, but the last day to submit their reimbursement request is November 16th, correct?
Correct, yes, yes.
So Jan, apologize for the confusion there. Next question, regarding outcomes, household numbers, is duplicated okay if they were served under different areas?
Yes, if they are served in different categories of service, then you can count them. But if you're counting the same people within the same category, that wouldn't be acceptable. So within the same category of service, no. Across categories, yes, you can count them.
We're a food bank, but don't feel that pounds are the important number. We feel that number of meals is what is truly an indicator of our success. Can we submit that instead? I would just jump in here and say that we're going to be using the data that you submit in the outcomes section of the form to sort of aggregate across all of the programs. So it's very important that you enter what's listed there, so that when we aggregate, we can get a good report that we can help to promote the success of these programs, and also to provide to the governor's office on the folks that we've served. Kim, any thoughts beyond that?
No, and I understand that there, lots of organizations count different things, whether it's meals or foods or dollar amounts of food equivalent put out. I mean, there's lots of different ways to measure that impact across food banks and pantries. So we had to basically just pick one. And the most common, it seemed, was, and the most uniform, was poundage. So that's what we're going to go with. So if at all possible, that's what we would want you to report out on.
Grant, and I know we're coming up on time, so we're going to keep answering a few questions, and folks are welcome to stay on after with us. We have some time, and we want to give that to you if we can, but certainly understand if you have to jump off. Again, we will post the recording of our training today, as well as FAQs later in the week that will provide answers to the questions that we've received thus far in the chat. We'll certainly share those with all applicants as we go forward. A couple more questions here, Kim, and then we'll wrap things up. If our grant does not provide direct services to clients, i.e. food or utility assistance, do you want us to report on indirect impact of the grant, i.e. these funds help to support the nonprofit stay open during the pandemic, which resulted in us serving XYZ number of clients and distributing XYZ pounds of food?
I think we want to see the number of clients, like if you were able to keep your doors open and serving clients because of the funds, then yes, you would report on those number of clients. Yep. If otherwise, without, reimbursement, you might have had to close.
Next question. We've just been contacted as one of the schools is going virtual and are needing us to deliver meals for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Is the staff time delivering an eligible expense? Again, this is not a budget category we have, and we are pivoting to meet the needs and mileage.
Okay, so if the staff are going to be working additional hours than what they normally work, then you can reimburse it. If they are kind of just altering and shifting their job duties and it's still their regular pay that's going out the door for payroll, then you can't. It has to be over and above their normal pay. So even if their job duties are changing a little bit, you can't reimburse unless it's over and above what was already normally budgeted. Now, additional transportation costs for those meals, like the gas and stuff like that, that sounds like it's stuff that you normally wouldn't have been doing, so that would be eligible.
So Kim, another kind of related question that we got was with salaried employees, if they worked extra hours but they were paid their regular salaried amount. In that case, that's a previously budgeted amount, and so it is not eligible under the Federal CARES Act guidance, correct?
Correct.
Yep. And again, guys, we're somewhat limited by the federal guidelines, as you know, as I'm sure many of you work with federal grants. So we're trying to meet those as best we can. Does the status show up as declined if only a partial piece of a requested reimbursement was declined? The answer to that, Lydia, is no. It will show as accepted and you will receive that partial amount. But when we make that determination and our reviewers complete their review and hand it off to the Office of Administration for payment, then we will make available to you the information about our decision. So you'll have information about that as we move through the process there. Again, you can only submit one reimbursement request. You cannot submit multiple. So you should, when you submit your reimbursement request, make sure that you are submitting for your full amount. This person, sorry?
I'm sorry, were you going to respond to that?
I just said that if when you submit, you should submit for your full reimbursement amount that you're requesting for your total grant award, because you only have one opportunity to submit. This person says, we are distributing vouchers to grocery store for food assistance through 3 healthcare centers. The disclosure of any patient information is prohibited by HIPAA. Can we report the individuals by voucher number and the location of the health center at which the voucher was distributed? Well, let's go ahead and answer that question first.
Yeah, I think that's okay if you can provide some sort of client ID, some unique client ID. I don't think we have to have specific name, but I think that goes back to you said it's delivery of food. Is that correct, Maggie?
Yes, it was for food assistance. And they did say that alternatively, if the grocery store invoiced them for the block of purchases of basic items that would be fulfilled by the vouchers, could they just include that amount in the supplies category, since it would be given in kind through a voucher?
Yeah, I think so.
So either or would work there. They could either provide the information using the number that they have, the voucher number, or they could report this in bulk in the supplies category.
Right.
And yes, you can absolutely move items across categories if you need to, if you don't think that you're going to be eligible for the amount that you requested. For instance, for salaries, you could shift some of your award to supplies if you needed to.
And the only thing I would mention here too, Maggie, and I probably should have mentioned it before, if now that we've gotten into it, and I know that, our timeline for getting approvals out and everything, changed some things for different organizations, and maybe situations just changed in general, or you got some other local grant funding. If you know now that you are not going to be able to use a sizable chunk of the funds, say, $10,000 or more, I would ask that you shoot an email into the grants at DED so that we are able to reallocate those funds if time allows. So if you know now and are willing and don't think and know that you're not going to be able to provide enough expenditures, we would ask that you go ahead and relinquish some of those funds and let us know as soon as possible what that amount is. And then we could reissue a new contract for you for the lower amount and get those funds out to some additional nonprofits.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and close it there. I know we have a myriad of questions still to answer in the chat, and appreciate everybody's time today on the training. We will have another training tomorrow, I believe. Same time, Kim, is that correct?
No, tomorrow's is in the afternoon at 2:00.
You're welcome to join us for that additional training. We will work to make sure that we have answers to these questions on that training. And then if we don't by then we certainly will when we post the FAQs and when we send out the reimbursement request. I can't stress enough how much our team really appreciates you all, really appreciates the situation that everyone is in, and wants to help you as much as we can to give you that full award amount and to get these dollars out the door as quickly as we can. We have, Kim won't say this, she won't brag on herself, but I feel like I can brag on her a little bit, but the team has been working incredibly hard, long hours to get this system up. We have been just, it's amazing the number of applications that have come in and the amount of work that it's taken to get all of this processed and to get you guys through the system. So we hope that we've built a system for you that will run smoothly over the next month as we process your reimbursements. And we are here for you if you get stuck. As I said before, you can reach out to us by phone, by email. You can certainly use the help desk, and you can find all of that information at ded.mo.gov/cares. I'm going to leave it there. Kim, any parting thoughts for everyone on the call?
No, Maggie, I think you covered it. Just, thank you for your patience and all you're doing to help the people in the communities that you're serving.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, and we might talk to you tomorrow afternoon.